Before we begin, I want the task force and the people here today to know this first, although we do have members of the press sitting there, is the board in closed session voted unanimously to extend Dr. Choi's contract by 2 years. He has graciously accepted. That is a unanimous indication of this board's commitment to Dr. Choi and the transformation of this institution. Dr. Choi, we appreciate it. And now back to Darrell and Terry's show.
Okay, so we're going to start off with Terry's highlighted an outline of what we're going to go through. Hot spots will be first. So Terry, why don't you go ahead and start off?
Thank you, Darrell. Believe it or not, I'm an author of a book on trying to change colleges and universities. And if there weren't universities and systems struggling to do this, I'd be sitting on the lake in Maine, okay? So everybody in this business is engaged in the kind of work that you're doing. On the one hand, what I admire you for has been the focus of this on giving governance as leadership right first. And I believe with your adoption of the report and the resolution, you've got the kind of blueprint for a really high-functioning system. This was the easy part. The conversation, relax, Steve, there's more opportunities to excel, as a friend of mine used to say. This was the easy part. No, we had a discussion, and it was, intriguing and demanding at some times, and, frankly, kind of tedious at other times, but this was the easy part. The hard part is when you start to make people unhappy, whether it's because you move their cheese or if it's not their livelihood, the programs that they have great loyalty to, or even the ideals of the university, the way they define it and think about it. And that's when actually the development programs mentioned in your resolution, but also your own kind of personal resolution, mental toughness, maintaining your generosity of spirit, but staying the course is going to be very important. You talked about, I think it was John Sunbolt saying that not a day goes by that he doesn't have a conversation with somebody who's got some kind of an agenda. It may just be to express their views. That'll amp up, and there'll be a lot more concerted efforts to wedge the chancellors from the board, the president from the board. Probably the challenge is greatest for the curators, as a matter of fact, because your friends and neighbors and people you like and may have known for years will be coming at you. So that's, from my experience at least, super important to talk to each other, stay with it, be flexible, obviously enough, not rigid or defensive, but stay the course if you're going to get this thing done. Those of you with backgrounds in business and the academy and politics know that what I'm saying is true. Anyway, but congratulations, and we don't need to focus on that at the moment, but because it'll come your way fairly quickly. As Darrell said, and as you would notice at the back end of your agenda, there's a number of suggestions for next steps. I'm just going to mention them real quick, but then let's go to the hot spots, and I've identified those as well. The next steps, if we have time to get to them, and we've got just about 2 hours. That includes a working lunch, but you'll be walking out of here, and there'll be a press availability in just about 2 hours from now. The role of the board going forward. I mean, this was a board hands-on experience so far. How does that get adjusted as you move into implementation as opposed to creation? Revising the CRRs, more work for the legal counsel. The accountability piece in general. Here's probably one of the most difficult to accomplish, and I don't really have a bromide for you. How to adjust the academic culture to one that is more oriented toward change, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Okay, a couple of abstract words to be sure, but you're going to have to earn your own living more than in the past. It's just, and the mentality, and I see this everywhere, and most of my life has been in public systems, most of my career at least, has been there's a sort of dependency on the state and an over-attention to, can we keep that cut to 2% instead of 4 or 6 or 10, or can we get a little extra dough here or there, as opposed to be blunt, my friends, how can we monetize some of the stuff we do and do it more efficiently so we can put our money. And that is a very fundamentally different way of looking at life than the university, which ultimately has its own reason for being in the minds of many academics. Shared services, I think you're, if not ahead of the game, you're on the right track there from what I've been picking up. There's a thing we're calling an initiative matrix that Steve in particular has maintained, and those are good ideas that came up in the course of this 6 months that we didn't want to lose. They'll have to be analyzed, prioritized. Big piece on onboarding for new staff and even adjustments for current staff to bring about this kind of stuff. And then a topic of respecting and sustaining the institutional distinctiveness rather, that Darrell mentioned. I'm not sure we're going to get all of these in 2 hours, but these are some ideas for the implementation. But let me go to the hot spots, which are the more compelling ones. And I wrote this in black, so it might be a little easier to read. And let me just mention them, and then I'm going to ask Moon in particular if we've captured the right ones here, or some that should be added. One hot spot is the reporting question. We picked up a little bit yesterday at the tail end of the conversation. Should the chief financial officers formally report to Ryan, for example? The same for HR, and the question has come up, what about IT? Reporting relationship between the universities and other units and the system. And then the fundraising development question. Not so much reporting on that one, but coordination, collaboration, alignment. Moon, do you want to?
Yes, those are the items that we should be discussing as the hotspots. And when it comes to campus leader reporting to the system leaders, I mentioned at the board meeting that I felt that if there is a good working relationship and good set of expectations that are shared from the president to the chancellors, that it would not be necessary. And also for us to attract and retain high-quality chancellors, they would like to have that ability to work directly with the CFO that reports to him or her. But with so many important changes that are needed moving forward, I'd like to evaluate this possibility and get some input. And I think your input is going to be very important, especially from the chancellors and the CFOs, CIOs, and the CHROs in the room.
Could I add, so that people understand the seriousness of this discussion, is I have asked Julia, and Julia has agreed to undertake a revision to the CRRs with regard to reporting. The cake is not baked. That's why we need input. I don't expect this to be the only time today. I expect people to be able to weigh in through this process. I am hoping that if there is going to be a change, that it be voted on in September, so everybody knows where I'm coming from. I actually think there should be a change, but it will end up taking a vote of the curators to decide it. But Julia, you've agreed to do that, have you not? And that's, so this is a serious discussion that we should have today, because this is a real decision-making point. A real decision has to be made.
Julia, do you want to comment at this point, or should we frankly just ask the chancellors to weigh in the best they can, and then others?
I would leave that to Julia.
I think a lot of folks know my position. I think we need to have alignment, better alignment in terms of consistency of how the shared services are provided, visibility, and frankly, the collaboration that I think is the foundation of shared governance. I don't think that it would mean that somehow you're not on the same teams anymore. But I'm definitely here to listen to your thoughts. But please understand that we're not changing anything is not going to be acceptable, and that change will occur. What it looks like is what we're going to be talking about. So if you have a response that I don't want anything to change, you might just want to keep that to yourself.
Moon wanted in, and then
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Tom.
I would say that in terms of, the structure that you have, if you have the right people in the positions, it's going to make a major difference. And you can have the best structure in the world, and if the wrong people are in the positions, it's not going to happen. To be very specific, when we hired Rick Bonyak, who reports to me, but the interface was with the system. I mean, we went through that every step of the way. It was Brian Burnett at the time, and now Ryan Rapp, and we're like this. We're like this, even though the reporting relationship was directly to me. And I think what really matters is the people in the system, the people on the campus communicating, working together with one voice. That's really what you have to have. So that's more important in my mind than the actual structure.
That's a great point, and I should have made a comment following Moon's statement as well. I don't think that things are not working. I do think we have the right people in place, but I think that when you are talking about a $3 billion enterprise, that is a lot to rest on.
Yeah.
There are changes. People come and people go, and we need to have the right governance structure in place. So that's really what I'm looking to solve for, because you don't want a governance structure that's based on personalities.
Moon, did you want
No, I'm good.
to? For a while, Molly, you can still say I'm the new guy. So, but you might want to comment now.
I think once we're done with this, he doesn't get to say that anymore.
Well, the system I'm used to is currently, it works like the system here right now, where there was no official reporting lines, but there were, in a sense, and everybody worked together. I hear the concern about alignment, and I think it needs to be there. What I would worry about is oftentimes in the large structures and large organizations, we correct for getting the wrong people by making structural changes and create structures around personalities rather than getting the right personalities in place and holding ourselves accountable to make sure that the right personalities are in place. So as we go through this, we need to make sure that we cannot correct for all personalities just by structure. And sometimes we can make the structure onerous just to cover ourselves. So I think the focus should be, do we have the right people? And if not, then we need to make the tough decisions to get the right people. And that will depend a lot on the president and the chancellors and the alignment there. And the alignment starts right there, and then the rest will flow.
One of the issues would be the involvement in hiring under this scheme, correct, Amundo? Yeah. Chris, you want to, then Alex?
So to the extent that we've gone through and outlined roles, responsibilities, and talked about our responsibility related to the campus alignment with the system and the campus alignment to achieve the goals of the system. Working directly with our chief financial officers is one of the key components of us having that authority on the campus and the responsibility to do these kinds of things. If there's ever sort of a discussion at all, I think what that brings for us as chancellors is the opportunity to talk directly to our to the system CFO, as well as to President Choi, and to talk about, okay, here's where everything's going, here's how our piece contributes to it. That brings the unique set of circumstances. And the setup, the way it is at this point in time, is one that actually really encourages and generates lots of those kinds of discussions where we really get to the bottom of a lot of different approaches. And don't get me wrong, I'm as change agent as they come. But one of the things I've done in asking and talking with all of our alumni, when I go out and meet with our alumni, is I've also asked them, are there parts of this that should not change, and why? And I
Let's
just
talk about the parts that might change, though. In all sincerity, I appreciate the things that work, but I'm interested in learning about the things that could be improved.
Agreed. And so I'd like to know what the improvement is for this.
Well, I think that's what we're working on.
No, that's,
though. I mean, that's what is going to be the process.
I don't know what it is. What I'm telling you is that there is a opportunity to have these really robust discussions in a current setup.
Do you guys currently use business model planning with ROI analysis when you're deciding to make investments?
To the extent that we have started doing far more of those, yeah. I mean, those have been slow coming in a lot of higher ed. And so, yeah, we're taking those leads and having the system lead that and responding to it. Yeah, I don't ever want to put a CFO in a position where a CFO is being told one thing by somebody with a direct reporting line and potentially something else by somebody else with a direct reporting line.
So the direct reporting line is one option, but we're also thinking about a myriad of different. When we say reporting lines, I think that might be a lightning rod, sort of 2 words. And I'd like to think of it more in terms of roles and responsibilities.
Okay, and that's great. I mean, that's...
If that helps everyone in this room to think about this as what are each person's roles and responsibilities, as opposed to getting mired in org charts and how those might look different, and if it's a dotted line or a solid line. I want to be thinking about what is the role of the system CFO vis-a-vis the campuses.
Right.
And we're talking about maximizing our assets and investing in ourselves. What does that look like? How do we help each other? This is not a fight over power. This is about collectively working together to make this system the preeminent one.
Comment on that?
Totally agree, and that, but,
Alex,
often, I'm just saying that one of the things about higher ed is that all these external accrediting agencies are all about the org charts. I mean, that's one of the first things you have to give everybody is what does your org chart look like? And how stable is it?
Let's hear from, and we got some other people, but I want to hear from all 4 chancellors first.
Yeah,
and then
right,
move around.
and then-
And I would like, not only Barb's next, but I would expect each CFO from the campuses to
I'd like to hear from them.
have a comment.
Alex?
So I think, what's being discussed here is really in the spirit of continuous improvement, and we should always look at what we're doing and how we're doing it. When I came to Mizzou, I remember having conversations with Rhonda as the CFO and with HR, and we already have a relationship with IT that it actually serves both the system administration and Mizzou, and really thinking about how we look at our what we're doing financially. For example, if I focus on the CFO, and I think many of the things that we're doing now do look at ROI. We can do even more probably. I try to make sure, we try to make sure, and I think Rhonda, I'll let her speak to that later, but I think Rhonda and Ryan are key parts of many of the things that we do at Mizzou. And I think you'll see that in what we're doing. But I understand the concerns in that it's very possible that you could have a chancellor who doesn't want that open dialogue and relationship between some of the officers, and that's a challenge. And that's something I agree. You can't have structures that that sort of allow that behavior. So how do we make it possible that the expectation is there that it's a collaborative relationship and that certainly at Mizzou, the things that happen at Mizzou, because of the scale that we're dealing with, have a big impact on the overall system. And that's why for many of our larger decisions, I actually do encourage Rhonda and Patty and others to talk with the representatives from the system administration because of the impact. So I'm on board with that. I think that the other part to this is whenever you present new concepts and why you're looking at something, it really is important. There's a book by Simon Sinek, I think is who it is, Start With Why. And it's important for us to be able to articulate why we are looking at something so that people understand that we're not just doing it just to do it, but why are we doing it? And I think that
that's
continuous improvement part is what we want to do. We have to focus more on return on investment. We have to make it clear that anything that I do at the institution, any decision we make financially is really an investment. And you'll even see that in how we actually rolled out some of the changes in budget, the differential changes in budget this year. It was made very clear that some of the changes reflected an investment in particular units as opposed to other units. And that's important that we start using that language and thinking that way. So, thank you.
And let me just add on to that. I think I appreciate you saying, you both asked why. What are we trying to change? And that is where we have to start. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I probably think, oh, everybody understands what I'm thinking, right?
Yeah.
And that's my fault. We all have to communicate more at the outset of what we're seeking to accomplish. And what I think we would like to accomplish together is addressing a lot of the concerns that I've heard over the last year from faculty, from other deans, from you, actually, a lot of you. How do we make decisions? What are the variables that we're going to be using when we're making investment decisions? What are going to be the criteria that are known, that we're going to value and prioritize on investments? And when we're making these investments, what returns are we expecting? These are business plans. Are each of your deans equipped to make those types of detailed assumptions? Or do they need some training? Do they need some help? Because they haven't been asked to do that before. We're not looking to assign blame, but we are looking to help one another with the expertise and the subject matter experts that we have to lend those that knowledge to help create a better plan. Because in order for us to continue making significant or to make any significant investments in research, remember that chart we saw at, the last board meeting that Ryan put up, or 2 meetings ago, where we have a projected shortfall in 5 years of upwards of $200 million. That's real cash money. We have got to solve for that. We're not going to solve for it by blaming one another or pointing fingers or fighting over who gets what. We've got to have a strategic plan that benefits all of us, and it's not going to be an equal pro rata. Mm-hmm. It has to be an investment that we have a belief and a passion for, and it's going to improve the state, it's going to improve everyone's lives, and it's also going to have a return on the investment. We've got to create margin in order to do that. Mm-hmm. We actually have to start making money. Mm-hmm. So how do we do that together by leveraging the collective wisdom and expertise that we have? And that is what I'm trying to solve for.
If I can just add one comment, and I think you're going to go to Barb. With everything that you said, I want to put the word with a sense of urgency, because we don't have much time. And we're going to start seeing those shortfalls beginning next year. So we have to grow our revenue, cut expenses. And do we have the appropriate roles and responsibilities now to be able to achieve those goals? And so it's more than the reporting line. You're right. It's more than the reporting line. It's a set of roles and responsibilities and expectations that we're going to get these things done.
Barb was next. Barb is
Barb.
waiting.
Okay, Barb and then the CFOs.
Just quickly to that point, reporting lines are a strategy, and Chancellor Maples asked what that was about. Chancellor Agrawal mentioned that the strategy has to make sure that there's a connection between personality and roles and responsibilities. I think that item number 3 that was just reviewed The goal is exercising central authority to optimize strengths. And so if the goal is to exercise central authority in a way to optimize strengths, for me, this is more a question of governance structure. And the really critical question for me sitting on a campus is, are the right voices at the table so decision-making is informed? And the biggest fear that I would have is that decisions can be made at a certain level without understanding some of the critical features that are going on in the campuses. And so to me, it's not whether Sharon reports to Ryan or whether Sharon reports to Molly. It's more the question of how do the right voices sit at the table and be heard so that the best decision can be made so that all campuses are stronger. And it's not an either-or choice.
Just before we go to the CFOs, I to kind of build off what Barb has said, I understand that, and I think where we've been challenged in the past, sometimes we confuse making sure all voices are heard and understood with that we need to get everyone to consensus. And I think the CFOs, I hope they would all say, we prefer to get to consensus, and I think probably 90% of the time we do. What I think they have the right to hold me accountable for is when I make a decision and they go, I don't understand that decision. It's okay at times, and I think if I was making every decision I was making, they say I understand it, but I disagree with it, that's probably another problem that gets to Chancellor Agarwal's point of you got to have the right people in those roles. But I think there are times where you say, okay, I've taken input, I understand different perspectives, but we're making a decision. I think, unfortunately, sometimes what I think Barb is articulating actually falls into that trap, though, of we're just going to put committees around this or we're going to build consensus, and then it effectively, I think what we're trying to guard against is this concept of if there's one no vote and we can't get them to yes, then we no longer move forward with something that is probably in the best interest. And it gets to where are we trying to, when we say optimize, at what level are we trying to optimize? I'd argue that, if it's only at the campus level, well, the campus is going to do what's in the best interest of the campus. Are you trying to optimize across the system?
Thank you, Ryan. Let's go to the CFOs. Rhonda, you want to?
So I've given a lot of thought about this over the last number of years, and one thing that strikes me as part of what's been happening is the environment is changing. So we can pretend if we want that it's not, but the environment has been changing for quite some time now. So the way that universities used to operate and use most of the resources they used were an allocation that they could make assignments that were largely driven by the academic priorities of the institution. It's been changing the role of the finance person or the finance roles within the university, and we're over time trying to adjust to what that means. So being a finance person has a lot more to do with strategy now than it did 30 years ago. 30 years ago, it might have been a lot more about, are we keeping things in the right buckets, and are people using the resources they have? And frankly speaking, when I was hired into my role, I was the first one in extension to be in that role that wasn't a CPA and an accountant. And my staff said, well, why did he hire you? And I said, well, thank you, good to know you too. And I said, well, why are you asking me that? And they said, well, you're not an accountant. And so I went to my boss at the time and said, why did you hire me? My understanding is the other finalists were all CPAs. And he said, well, Rhonda, there's enough accountants in University Hall and in Jesse Hall to make sure the pennies are in the right columns. He said, but the real struggle we have in extension today is trying to align our resources to our highest priorities. And he said, with your economics background and the sorts of things that you do, he said, that's an asset that we can add to the team. You certainly need all the accounting stuff to work, but his big concern was extension was changing at the time, and how were we going to go find new resources, and how were we going to align things? And so over time, our institutions have to keep that involvement happening. And so one of the things we've been doing on our campus is recognizing that it is really important that each finance person understands the business of their part of the university, but that they actually have the ability to carry out the financial part of it, because that world has become more complicated over time. And so we've, had a structure over the last number of years where it's matrixed in that the key finance people in the schools and colleges, I have a role in who gets hired in those roles. And I have a role in indicating whether I think there are issues with whether the person's carrying it out, but they work directly with their dean or their vice chancellor. And I've always seen my role the same way, that I have an absolute responsibility to the broader system to carry out the role in a way that respects the fact that we're part of a broader organization and lives within good financial guidance. And then my role with the chancellor and all the academic folks on our campus is to ensure that with the scarce resources we have, we line them up on the academic priorities that make Mizzou as successful as it can be. And part of what makes all of this difficult is that there are endless things that our university could do to improve the world. There are so many things we could do, and so those really tough decisions come down to which things make the biggest impact and how do you line those up with the resources we have. And so to me, I always feel like I have an absolute responsibility both directions, and that's a tension a finance person has to get comfortable with. That there are times I have to be able to say to Alex, I get that's a priority, but I've had past bosses, never Alex, say to me, but we have to. Well, just because you feel like you have to doesn't mean you can afford it. You have to figure out, well, if I have to this, then I can't that. And you have to do all that tough work to say, well, everything I need to say yes to, that probably means I have to say no to some things.
Exactly.
Terrific. Sharon?
Thank you, Rhonda, that's great.
So I've had the opportunity over my career to work really in a model that has always had a central function and then a distributed function, so the university and in this case the system. And when I was hired at UMKC, I could not have been hired without an interview with Nikki Krawitz, who was the CFO at the time, and who became a really strategic partner for me. And so today I really view that while it might not be formalized, and maybe that's really what we're talking about, I have an accountability and a responsibility both to do the work that I need to do for UMKC, but also to meet the needs of system and to make sure there is always alignment and that we are thinking strategically and that we are leveraging our resources collectively. So, as I say, not really formalized, but certainly clear to me that I need to be able to work in this matrixed world that we're in, and I need to deliver and meet everybody's needs to the best of my ability.
Rick, you want to get in on this?
Sure. So at UMSL, I'd like to start out by saying in October of last year, we hired a new business manager for the College of Business. And when we hired that business manager, we did something different. And that the business managers, in the past, they'd always been called fiscal officers, just to get the vocabulary the same. We changed it to business manager because we added a task to the statement of work that was significant. We called it financial planning, and that was the long-term 5-year plan. But anyway, we hired the business manager to work directly for me. And at the same time, we took the business managers from arts and sciences and education, and we moved those over as well. They were the first 3. It was a test case last October. In April of this last year, we completed the exercise, and we moved all business managers over into my reporting chain. So essentially, it's kind of the argument we're having right now, discussion we're having right now, but it's at a lower level in the organization. And it created, to say that it created angst with the deans would be an understatement. It did. It took Tom and Kristen to come in and as arbitrators and negotiators and try and get us to a place that this worked. And I appreciate their effort to do it. It was hard, but for us in our university, it works very well. And I think it was something that had to be done. I'll tell you what has been reinforced since April. I want to talk about just 3 things quickly. One is involvement, the second one is alignment, and the third one is independence. I think there's kind of the fallacy out there that if the reporting line goes up to the CFO at any level, then the focus of the business manager's activity is with things that the CFO cares about. The thing that we said at UMSL right from the beginning, and we really mean it to be true, is that the business manager has the expectation, the requirement, 95% of their job is to be in the college. 5% of their job is to be with me. The reason for that is their job. Their assignment is to make sure their college or their organization runs well and is optimized. They also live out in the college, so they're the best ones to run that. It's not me. And we really hold true to form on that regardless of where they report, the expectation for involvement is that they're out running their own business and doing the things that are right for that business. The second one is alignment. This is an area that we picked up a lot of ground, because when we had business managers operating independently in all of the colleges, by definition, if they're out operating in each one of those colleges and reporting to those colleges, they're going to do things different ways. They're going to operate based on the preferences and the intentions of the colleges that they're out working for. And as a result, and I say colleges, but it's also the major budget holders as well, because we have non-academic budgets that this applies to as well. But as a result, over time, we had 15 different processes that we used, and we had many different sets of tools, and we had different ways to do things. And not only was it inefficient, but it really created a lot of barriers of people being able to move from one organization to another. Essentially, they hired into an organization, and that's where they were going to spend their career. It's not to say they couldn't jump, but when they did, they were learning a whole new job because the business operated in a different way. So I would say it's not the only way to get alignment, but it certainly helps that I'm able to call the business managers together, and collectively we talk about the current activity and the processes and the way things are working out in the colleges. And now, instead of them solving problems on their own, they're solving problems collectively as a group. And there's a lot of efficiency that goes along with that. The third one, and I personally feel that it's the most important, I don't know if the group does, and I think it's just the difference in the culture that I came from rather than being in an academic culture for my career, but that's one of independence. So Chris had made the comment that the last thing he would want to do is to put his CFO into a position where he was caught between the preferences of the chancellor and the preferences of the system CFO. Quite frankly, I believe that's where the CFO should be. I think that with, not just with the CFO, but I think with any financial decision, I think that as a rule, the person who makes a decision shouldn't be the person who approves the decision. I refer to that as just segregation of duties, but I think that that's really an important tenet for financial decisions. And I don't think it's as scary as it sounds, because if you have an operational decision, regardless of who's making it, if it's a good decision, there should be no problem in getting it approved. And in fact, it should be very career limiting for a finance person or an HR person or an IT person at any level in the organization to refuse to approve good decisions. The whole idea of the framework is to protect yourself against a non-optimal decision. And it's not that people intentionally make those, but sometimes you just don't understand from a single perspective if a decision is good or if a decision isn't. Sometimes the best decisions for an organization aren't good decisions for an overall entity. And it's not that the decision maker is making a decision wrong or has bad intentions. It's just they don't have the same level of visibility to either goals, preferences, or other things that are going on in the organization. So I think that independence is important. I think you get stronger and better decision making with that independence. I have to say as Tom said, I don't have a formal reporting relationship to Ryan. With all due respect to Tom and Kristen, and I think they know this, I act as if I do. I also act, though, that I have the reporting relationship to Tom and Kristen. I think as a result, on our campus, the way things work, there's a lot of time spent sitting around the chancellor's table. And it's Kristen and Tom and I, and very seldom do we agree on the first time through any discussion. But I have to say, in 2.5 years, I can't think of any instance that we didn't end up coming to consensus and getting a decision approved. I can't think of anything that died on the table because we couldn't find a common rock to stand on. It just wasn't always easy and it wasn't always efficient, but we got there. And I'm not sure that we could if there wasn't this environment of independence. If I knew that I had a direct reporting relationship to Tom, and that was my only reporting relationship, and I was, younger in my career, it would make a big difference that at the end of the day, that, if Tom said this is the way it's going to be, that I would feel a lot of pressure to fall into line eventually. I don't have that, and I don't think it's stopped us one bit in terms of being able to come to a conclusion. And I think we've gotten better decisions because of it. The final thing I'd just like to say, and then I'll be quiet. I think sometimes there's the tendency to, I'm going to use the word academic environment again, and I want to say for the record, I love the last 2 years of my career. I'm so glad that I did this because it's really a rewarding place for me to be. So I don't say this in a critical way at all. I just say it in a little bit different way. But I think that there's the tendency to view sometimes as finance, HR, IT, as being just kind of the non-important supporting fields. And they really don't have the same elevated level of respect sometimes that some of the academic fields do. But I think sometimes we overlook the fact that finance is a specialized field on its own, as is HR, as is IT. IT probably being the most complex of all of them right now. And I think to make the assumption that we can make specialized financial decisions, or we can talk about investment models, or we can compare investments from one side of the company, of the institution to the other side of the institution, is just naive. What might be the best answer for the College of Business may not be the best answer for UMSL when we compare it to all of the departments and all of the colleges within UMSL. So I think that in some ways having the alignment among the specialty fields and letting the finance leaders make finance decisions that make sense for everybody, as well as IT, as well as HR, I think that carries a lot of strength.
Excellent, Rick. Thank you. Thank you very much. Cuba?
So while I agree with my colleagues, I wanted to take the discussion in a little bit different area. I've been at the university for a long time, and I have seen the role of the CFOs on the campuses change a lot over the last 30 years. I think it's been for the better. Early in my career, it was very much a control function. The CFO's job was to make sure everybody followed the rules and then report on it, what was done, and that was kind of it. As Rhonda mentioned earlier, that has evolved as the rest of the world has evolved, and in order to be able to succeed and to thrive in a continually changing environment, strategy has become the critical role that I believe that the CFO plays. There are people lower in our organization who deal with the day-to-day things, who make sure that we have the information that we need. But really, from a CFO's perspective, it's about making sure that you're at the table to ask the right questions at the appropriate time. So as we look at things and how we go forward, one of the things that we have on my campus that I can't take credit for it because it was started before I got there is the fiscal officers in the academic units do report up through the finance organization.
Formally?
Formally. However, what makes it work is that we provide excellent service, and the deans and the departments feel that those people are on their team. But what's critical for me to be successful in my role is to make sure that the deans and the provost and other academic leaders on campus, who are really the revenue generators, that they view me as a valued partner and that I am brought to the table very, very early in the conversation so we can ask those tough financial questions. What is it that you're trying to achieve from an academic perspective? What's going to be the financial impact on the institution if we're successful? What are the risks involved in this kind of thing? What do you hope to achieve? And then how do we balance that with what are your other priorities? Because we do have limited resources. So if we're going to do this, what are we not going to do? And what are the impacts on the institution to that? Now, if I'm viewed as that valued and trusted partner, then I'm brought to the table early when we just begin to think about ideas, and we can shape those and make decisions. If, on the other hand, I'm viewed as someone who's always going to say no, not as a facilitator to help us make the right decision, then I'm not going to be brought to the table until we're way far down the road, and then it becomes a matter of trying to fix a direction where we've already sunk money. So it's important that we don't do anything from a roles and responsibilities perspective to damage that relationship, or it makes me less effective. The last thing is, I know that for Ryan to be effective as the CFO of the system, and the system to be effective, each of the campuses have to hold up their weight and do the best they can and provide that positive return to contribute to the whole. I need that relationship that I have with Ryan. So he's there as my confidant, he's there as my advisor, he's there if there's something that's going on that I think I don't feel quite comfortable about this, I don't know how this might impact other things. I also need my other CFOs, because I need to know what kinds of things are going on their campus, how things are working, how things are not working, where might there be things where I can take ideas from them and tweak the things that I'm doing to improve the performance of my overall organization. But I also need to be seen as not just as a system person who's looking in, but as the campus advocate. And it's important that the people on my campus know we do have these dialogues, and that there are rules and standards and things that we have to follow. There are expectations for performance that I have to be accountable to Ryan for, but that I'm there to be the campus advocate and to explain their side and to help them understand. So it's this very interconnectedness that I think helps us to be successful. And then I want to talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, and that is faculty. Faculty are our number one revenue producers, and they also are very entrepreneurial and independent. The reason that they're faculty in the first place is that they don't just step in line and march with everybody else. They're not conformers. They've got great ideas, but they've got to see finance and the CFO as being an advocate to help them reach the heights. But also in my role, I have to also balance that with, here are the financial realities of what you're talking about. So how can we achieve these great academic things, but do it in a financially responsible way? And remind them we can't do it all. So what are we going to pick, and how are we going to do that? And so we have to be able to have a structure that makes everyone on campus see that I am there on their team, but at the same time, I have responsibilities, fiscal responsibilities back to the system to make sure that what we're doing is going to benefit the whole. And that's how we become greater than the sum of the parts. Now, I don't know exactly how we distill that down into what Curator Burnsick you're trying to get, or where you're trying to get us. But I do believe we've made great positive changes in that direction, and that we're poised for a lot of exciting things in the future.
Thank you, Ryan. Julia, any reflections on what you've heard thus far?
No, I thank everybody for sharing your thoughts, because this is an open forum for that. Being in the corporate environment, I tend to see the world similarly to Rick, in that for us, having the separation does not impede any of that collaboration. And so naturally, that's a model that, because I'm familiar with that makes a lot of sense to me. But I've got to earn my own reputation, right? And so I like having someone else co-making decisions with me, because that, when it's later questioned whether or not it was a good decision, I've got all the backup to show that we have worked through this together. And it's sort of a SOX Enron type thing, right? I'm from a legal perspective in the corporate environment, you want those separations and that balance, because it helps everyone in the end. And I know that we have different structures in place that many feel achieve those, but I also hear a lot of, it's based on this relationship. And as Rick said, a CFO, or frankly, a lawyer who's in the business of just being the no police doesn't stick around, because the whole reason you're there is to help the enterprise to succeed. So my job is to get you to yes, but within what everyone with other responsibilities agrees is the right path. And it forces a collaboration, at least in the corporate environment. That said, I'm interested to hear number one, what are the fears of changing a reporting structure if we're all aligned to what we're trying to accomplish? I'm not even tied to a reporting line, but there is a palpable fear that I'd like to understand the basis for, because from my perspective, sometimes the struggle seems to be one over control. And I think as deans, as chancellors, as faculty, I think what we're saying is you can't make bad decisions. We are going to hold you accountable. How can we help you make really good decisions? Doesn't mean that Rick, Ryan, Cuba, Rhonda are going to have the executive authority to say, you can't do it. Because then we're going to hear about that, right? So when we're talking about it, to me, it almost is a little bit, to me, it feels like what we've got in the corporate context is truly shared governance, which is the irony to me. As opposed to some autocratic authority that I get to make the decision and I get to write the check, right? And so that's to me maybe the irony. So I'd like to know what the fear is if the roles are all aligned. And I'd also like to say, when we talk about, well, we want people to think this or that, we are the leaders. We get people behind it.
A quick question for my clarification. Do you know yet, or have you decided yet, is your portfolio on this task force all three of these things and more, or perhaps more? Or is it just finance?
All three of those are on the current.
And maybe more, maybe less.
Okay.
So when you say, what are people afraid of? I think part of what they're afraid of is there's not a long history of whoever officially has the direct line respecting the other side of it. So when we say, you get the right people in the roles, all of this means a lot less. Well, if one side gets to do the hiring and decide who the right person is, no matter which way you're organized, there's where the risk and the fear comes in. So if, Alex got to hire in my position just all without any consideration to whether Ryan believes I have the right skill set to do the job, that puts Ryan in a bad spot, because, Alex may not have enough breadth of understanding of all things finance to know whether a candidate really has the depth that Ryan would need the person to have. If Ryan has the direct line, then the fear becomes that he could get someone who is very much an expert in finance, but doesn't have the depth of understanding about the things in higher ed that Alex needs someone to know. And so to me, that's why I always look at my role as it is very much a matrix. And for me to be successful, as you've indicated, is I've got to make sure that the people who are counting on me on both sides of it get the attention they need, and I hear what their issues are, and I try to bring those together. And so I think that's the fear, and actually people have experienced it when it has moved all one direction. There have been people put in roles who spend, and the problem is it can take years to fix it. So you get the person in the role who's not respecting the other side of the equation, and you might be in that mix for several years before it all coalesces to somebody says, hey, that person can't stay in that role. So it's that collaboration happening constantly is the part that is important. And so to me, that's what leans more to having some kind of matrix organization versus getting really caught up on, because truly in my mind, I have a direct line to two people. There's the one I spend the most time with, and there's the one that I get a lot of advice from and I have to be responsible to, but I don't ever think to myself, gosh, Alex and I can just get off down this path and, I don't care what Ryan's going to say. I understand there's an issue there, so.
But
Maybe
in your mind,
Marcia,
you
then
have the
Barbara
dual
on the
line.
fear question?
But I'd also like to hear from the chancellors on that issue, because I think that there is a little bit of
Yeah.
perspective there.
I think addressing the fear portion is, and I think the crux of the issue here is misalignment between Ryan's position and the chancellor's, because that's the fear is that what if there were differences there, then we put the campus CFOs in a very bad situation where the system CFO is saying one thing and the chancellor is saying something else, and then who's responsible ultimately? Well, in that case, for the campus, ultimately, the chancellor is responsible, and that's the fear on the chancellor's part is what if there's a different drummer that we're asking the CFO to? So how do we make that alignment work at the highest level? So, and that takes away then the fear. And that is at the system level, the alignment between the president and the chancellors and the system officers needs to be there. And then it takes away all the other fears.
That's been a common theme throughout the last year, is that there hasn't in the past been a great deal of transparency in decision-making. And I've heard from some of the chancellors over the last year, that they want these goals. They want to know what the system and President Choi's goals for them are, so they can achieve that. This is interesting.
But it needs to be almost in the same room, the system officers with the president and chancellor agreeing on strategies. And then the implementation, definitely, that's the CFOs, and Ryan would know more about that than I would know about the everyday accounting and strategies. But if we can get that alignment, for instance, I've been calling Ryan up or getting his advice on a lot of things. I realized that I need to interface with him to be, just for his expertise, if nothing else. But that's the fear. And again, switching it back to not doing it on personalities, but revoting if there were two wrong personalities, and the system CFO just decided that they had their own agenda, how do we correct for that? Because then again, puts the campus CFOs in a very bad situation.
Well, then I agree with you, and that's it's a tall order to address, but everyone's roles have to be defined.
Correct. And I don't think there's inherently any issue here about a power grab, but that's the fear. What if people were going in different directions?
Other comments on the fear factor?
I'll make a comment on it. Probably the fear factor is more intensified if the budget situation is not good. And, I'm trying to look over the role of the board and the reporting relationship, and if indeed one is struggling with mismatch of revenues, mismatch of expenditures, I think the fear factor gets intensified. But aside from that, I think probably anything is related to change as well. If one has a certain structure and suddenly there's a change, that there's a certain discomfort, and maybe fear is not the word, but discomfort or uneasiness about it. But certainly a solvent financial structure can make so many things look better, and you can reduce anxiety and tension. So our job is to make sure we do have as balanced a budget as possible, as we can, working with the system and working with the Board of Curators.
That's a great point.
Maybe Barbara on the fear is a barrier to change here.
I'd just add, Julia, you asked the question, what do we have to fear if what you want to have happen is that we have people sitting in a room asking, how can we help you make really good decisions? My fear is that that's not what gets asked, because there's a good history within the system that what really happens is we will make the decision for you and you will not have a voice at the table. And particularly whether it's a financial decision or an HR decision or an IT decision, if the decision's made based on finance or on a personnel policy or a technology deal, and it's not what is in the best interest of the academic portfolio of the system and the universities in it, and the decisions made on our campus, we've literally spent millions of dollars and tens of thousands of people hours unpacking decisions that were made when we didn't have a voice in them. and they weren't good for what we were trying to do. And if we could have just simply made an informed decision and had a governing structure that allowed us to make an informed decision, then we could have lived and adjusted, but we didn't have that opportunity. So again, it comes back to my real fear is that there's not a formal governance structure by which wherever people report, the right voices are at the table to understand all of the aspects and nuances of whether it's, making a purchase because it's a good collective purchase, whatever that might be, that we didn't do it for the right reason from an academic perspective.
So that is, if I can comment on that. So Barb, that is a legitimate fear. And if I were a chancellor responsible for my own campus, I would not want decisions made from above without input. But once collectively that decision is made with input, then we have to follow through as being part of a team. But now in the role of a president, my concern is that universities will go and pursue programs that the system may view as being less than appropriate. Perhaps say private-public partnership that has no benefit to the university. We've seen that happen. Perhaps it's the purchase of software and customization because that campus wants to be unique as opposed to using the same processes so we can collaborate. So I don't think it's at either extreme, but it's somewhere in that middle. How do we make sure that our decisions are made with informed decision-making so that we avoid those two extremes?
Exactly.
John?
My wife balances my checkbook. So I'm not a finance person, but what I hear, and I'm optimistic, is the desire for collaboration.
Yes.
That's the word of the day. It has not always been available in the past. We have a new president, we have new chancellors, and I think that collaboration I think we have consensus on that. So I'm optimistic. I don't think you're going to solve dotted lines, direct lines today in this discussion, but you put it as a hot spot. I think it's been a very fascinating discussion. And I think with the goodwill of everybody around the table on having the right people at the table when decisions are made, and it's going to vary from campus to campus, relationships. Tee it up and let's work on it. That's my view. I don't think we can reach a consensus on what it looks like here today.
Julia, Chairman, do you have enough at this stage to move on to the other hotspots?
If I can say, and I don't want to speak for Julia, this is an ongoing process.
This isn't the last time we're going to talk about it.
Julia, this is going to be done in the right way, and we will hopefully reach a vote on either change or not change, but we're going to have something in front of us in September. It will be on the agenda as long as my advancing age doesn't make me forget it. Where's Cindy? Cindy? Julia will be on the agenda in September with a CRR. Okay, now, you all saw me offload that to Julia, or to Cindy, so it's done.
Thank you all. Frankly, it was a really enlightening discussion, as a matter of fact, getting beyond the color of the line. Maybe before lunch, maybe a little conversation about the other hotspot, and I'll return to John here in a minute because he mentioned that we may be further down the road here, and the fly is further down the road. Maybe further down the road than some people think on this. And then maybe, about noon or so, break for lunch?
I would say a brief discussion, if you don't mind, on fundraising development. We're going to have a 10-minute break for lunch. We are not completed. We haven't got to the matrix yet. You should bring the lunch here. Yeah, bring your lunch back in. We're going to do a working lunch.
Okay, so at least get a little start on that question, and then, as the chair said, we'll take our break and lunch. But John, yesterday, I think you were talking about some progress here.
Oh, this is Jamie Farmer's area, and I didn't mean to say we're fairly far down the line on that.
Okay.
I do think we're in silos on fundraising.
Okay.
And it's historic, and it's appropriate. Alumni generally tend toward the campuses that they came from in terms of contributions and business partnerships. Now that we're doing, and I think we'll be doing, more collaborative projects, TPMC being the litmus test here, and maybe we'll get to talk a little bit more about that. I think that there needs to be some, what I would call oversight, and some sharing and collaboration between campuses, so you don't have somebody going in the door from one campus and then the same day, and this has happened, somebody else going in the door from a different campus with a different project that has not been given system attention. So I'm not sure how far down the road we've gotten, but again, with collaboration and the spirit that I'm now hearing, I'm optimistic. That's all I'm going to say.
Moon?
So with fundraising and development, not only are there opportunities for collaboration that the system can enable, but it's also very important for the president and the board to set expectations. For example, we know that as part of our Student Success Missouri Compact, that we have to provide more support, especially need-based support, for scholarships. And so giving expectations, setting expectations and goals for the chancellors as well as development officers to reach those goals are going to be very important. What I see at this university, there are many positive things that are happening. Mizzou's endowment grew to $1 billion. Those are all major accomplishments. But we can't have our strategic plan driven by philanthropy. It has to be the other way around. And I do want to bring up, for example, when we have a very successful hospital, MU Healthcare, that's over a $1 billion enterprise, we want to be able to see more development in grateful patients, more development when it comes to supporting the capital programs at the hospital. Those are some examples that I see. We also recognize that last year, around this time when the board had a retreat, we asked a question about fundraising for the greenhouse. Agriculture in this state is the #1 industry. And for us to be able to get support from companies like Monsanto or now Bayer or other highly recognized alums who support agriculture in the state is very important. And so we are going to play a more active role. There is a CRR that existed about the role of the system and the president in emanating programs for development and advancement. And as part of that CRR, I will be reconstituting the UM Council for Institutional Relations so that we can collaborate, but also set clear expectations for fundraising and advancement, working with the board.
Terry?
Thank you. Just one comment on this, put out on the scope. I think that one of the things, when we talk about fears or things that keep us from moving into an area, I think one issue that we need to address is maybe finance. But the idea of the role that advancement plays in the operation of the smaller campuses, I'll speak from the perspective of UMSL, is that there are so many ways we're budget constrained that our donor relationships just form the basis in some areas of whether we're going to be able to operate or not. Operate's the wrong word, but invest in facilities or infrastructure. But I think that if we could relax one other area of our financial plan, and that would be that right now we're on a fairly fixed percentage in a formula of distribution of state funding, for instance. We know that when the state gives money, we're going to get 13.8% of it, or whatever the number is, and then that's going to be our share. If there were years that we, as a group, all essentially shared donors for a common purpose, but we knew that we also had flexibility in other areas of the budget, that we might get relief in those years, or if there was something that we needed that perhaps the distribution of state funding wasn't fixed at 13.8%. In other words, I think there's other areas of the budget that if we can assure the group that there's going to be flexibility in other areas, it would open up the desire or the willingness to collaborate in areas of fundraising.
About time to adjourn for lunch, I think.
I'd like to hear the chancellors have anything on this,
Okay.
and then we're going to adjourn. If you do. If you don't, that's okay.
Well, I mean, we can go on for hours.
Well, you and I have talked about this.
I guess myopically, if I look at what we do in St. Louis, it's not just a balancing within the system and looking at priorities and looking at how we coordinate. We also have WashU, we've got SLU, we have other institutions that we are competing with as well as cooperating with. And so we have particularly extra challenges in St. Louis in terms of balancing within this arena of development and advancement.
I would like to say one thing on this. I think this goes to a lot of the decisions. It's interesting to me, and this is probably our fault for not inviting them, that we have no development officers here. Dr. McTaggart, you would know this more than I, but as we look forward to the finance and more entrepreneurship and where the money comes from, philanthropy must become a larger and more effective thing than it has been. I believe, in my view, that at least the University of Missouri, all four universities, that development has been looked at as the gravy. And that is how we'd like to say it, and that's how the donors want to hear it sometimes, that they don't want their money to go to the basic operation of the institution. But there's two things on that. That's not the new world. What separates universities to some extent in this country anymore, again, Terry, you tell me if I'm right or wrong, is the size of the endowment and the funds of the available and the structure of the endowment so that there are unrestricted funds available. Endowment money that can be put into student tuition, into real dollars, is extremely valuable to us. Development officers will tell you, I wish we had some here, that's hard to do. Well, again, a lot of things are hard to do that are necessary. Yeah. The other thing about this is that it has to be done strategically. Now, I wish, again, I'm not talking behind everybody's back, but the board and the president made a decision that the greenhouses at Mizzou were a strategic priority because of the area of excellence in plant science, because of the availability of corporate partners, and yet development, I believe, I wish he was here to correct me if I'm wrong, has pretty well ignored that. So again, development has to be done more strategically. So to me, I think we're almost done, unless I'm not going to insist on the last word, but we as a university, all of us, have to look at fundraising and development as every bit as important as funds coming from other sources, and to do it strategically and in a way that serves the best interests of the university.
That's a really good point. I want to go back to the meeting that was chaired by Curator Farmer back in April, where we brought together all of the marketing directors as well as the development vice chancellors and the CFOs. And what was discussed at the time was that was the first time that this group of individuals met together to talk about how do we actually support the goals of the university using philanthropy. Universities that are chasing endowments, I know why they're doing it, but the endowment growth is not going to benefit the university as much as getting more annual support. And it's not annual support for operations or deficits. If we target specific areas like, for example, the TPMC, if we target areas like scholarships for need-based students who have outstanding records but they can't afford to go to college, those are supporting the strategic initiatives of the university that is being funded in part by philanthropy.
Let me make sure, I have a question here. Are we asking donors that have traditionally donated only to UMSL or UMKC or S&T to contribute to projects like the TPMC? I mean, what exactly are we asking of these other donors? Because I can see a university justifiably, honestly, being territorial of that donor.
Yes, there's some territorial nature about donors. There's no question about that. But if there is a donor who traditionally supported UMSL in areas such as business and criminal justice, because those are areas of strength, but has not been approached, but instead has been approached by WashU for precision medicine, instead of that donor making a donation to a university outside of our system, to engage them by saying that there are some opportunities for UMSL faculty members in mental health research area that can contribute to urological studies that are a focus of TPMC. So would that individual be willing to support UMSL and Mizzou to support the TPMC? Those are the opportunities that we're trying to see.
And maybe this has already been done, but it seems as though the best way to attract UMKC's donor, UMSL's donors, or S&T's donors is to assure their inclusion in the TPMC. And then it seems as though it'd make more sense for those donors.
Yes,
Okay.
and
That's been done.
they are to be part of the TPMC, and I think based on the interest of faculty members, I think that that's going to happen. But I've also challenged the chancellors to share with them, if you want to become part of TPMC, if you want your university faculty members and the universities to become part of TPMC, there has to be skin in the game, which means, are you willing to make investments from your operating budget? Are you willing to make investments through your donors who may be willing to support this? It has to be a benefit that comes because of their participation that goes both ways.
Amy?
You know, just a thought as I'm listening to this, and I've had the opportunity to meet with different development officers who I believe are trying their hardest to raise dollars, and sometimes it's hard to go in and meet with somebody and force them. You've got to educate them on that opportunity, but there's a lot of individuals out there that just, they want to give to what they want to give for, and we're a willing audience to collect money right now, right? So as I sit here and I just think about it, is there any sort of suggestion to have the individual development offices at each campus, and this is just a suggestion, and also that centralized development office that is actually sending out literature and contacting this whole donor base in a more of a system voice, so it doesn't preclude the individual efforts of raising money on each university, which each one of those development officers has an initiative too, but there's also a system voice that we've got our few strategic priorities, and so we are directly focusing, so it doesn't necessarily feel like they're crossing over each other. I don't know if there's a way to work that out, but that's some of the friction, at least that I felt when having conversations with some of these development officers.
And we should discuss that when we convene the UM Council, and I'd like for you to be a part of that.
Sure.
John?
So I do think that Moon and Daryl and Jamie have sort of hit the nail on the head, because there is clearly a history of silo. And there always will be. I mean, people rightly look to their school where they went and also where they live. But there are occasions when it ought to be a university-wide effort. You have to have buy-in of all 4 campuses if it's going to be a university project. And I'm going to tell a quick but short story about on the TMPC and
TPMC.
TPMC, Precision Medicine, where a school came to UMKC, and the chancellor wasn't invited. There were no representatives of the campus to sell the TPMC. I think that has been corrected, but that's the issue, is when you have a project, you have to have. So I was going to do this on another occasion, but now's the good occasion. St. Louis has the School of Optometry. They have a strong connection with the Danforth Plant Sciences. Yes, ag is in Columbia, but that's a huge resource. S&T has cybersecurity. Well, St. Louis does too, but tremendous potential there. And they now have our Department of Nuclear Sciences. It isn't in Columbia anymore. They have to be part of the TPMC. UMKC has untapped foundations. None of them showed up to the meeting that occurred in Kansas City, even though they were invited. One of them accepted and then didn't come. And that's because there hasn't been the outreach on that project. So that's the kind of project where collaboration, it's on the Columbia campus, but we all need to support it. You have to have buy-in, and I think we will. But I'm making the point that there are occasions when there ought to be some real coordination. That's the number one priority of the curators, and we ought to all be pulling on the same oar. And in order to do that, you've got to have the other campuses and their alums and the businesses and the foundations understanding that that's going to be a university resource.
I'm getting ready to, did you have something to say, Marcy?
No, I was just going to add that after the Kansas City meeting, we had the meeting in St. Louis, and it was well organized. UMSL was there, Dr. George was there, and the TPMC was the subject of that conversation. Alex gave a tremendous talk to all of those business people there in attendance, and explaining how this was a university project and that all 4 campuses are going to share and participate in the benefits of the TPMC. And I would agree, it's the meeting that should have been held in Kansas City, but it was held in St. Louis. Julia was there, and it was a good meeting.
We're going to have to move on. We're going to take a break for a working lunch. We still have a lot of work to do. If we don't get to the matrix, Daryl's going to be mad at me, and I don't want Daryl mad at me. I might say, and Julia reminded me of this, you know, what we're all trying to figure out is how do we all best work together? And there will be differences of opinion maybe on that structure, but I hear sometimes voices that are concerned that we're trying to work or move forward without somebody, and I will tell you, this board and President Choi, and I think everybody is committed. The structure changes we make, which are subject to debate, and which you all should feel free to weigh in on, and I would say to chancellors, we want to hear the voices of your development officers too. But we're all simply trying to work together. And short break. We're not adjourned yet. Yeah.
Take a break, correct?
Yeah, break. Working lunch back here.
Come back.
We're going to roll. We really are close to the end. We've got hard stops coming up. I'm going to try to get through my meal before we have to end. We had promised Marcia Fisher and then Terry.
Daryl, how's that? Marcia.
Thank you. So much of the discussion we had around finance is very similar for HR, but I thought I would sort of failed my duties if I didn't give a little more context about HR work while we're continuing to have these discussions later. And really, it starts with the opening discussion that Curator Steelman had yesterday, where one of the main priorities were attracting and retaining the top staff and faculty, and having a culture and a climate that helps them be elevated to do their best work. Those things don't happen by accident, and really having strategies around recruiting and onboarding and professional development and culture are key. And through the administrative transformation work that we've been doing, and we've delivered to the board a conceptual model about how we can university-wide HR deliver those services. And if you recall from the last board meeting, we have started 3 projects and have 5 more that are mobilizing in August. But one of those 3 projects that we've started is looking at the organizational structure of HR. And we've spent a day with the HR leaders thinking about how do we leverage our resources and our talents so that we can deliver those important services and those strategies without building them up on each campus, because we can't afford to do that. So I share that to give you the context of the HR work and where we already are in looking at some of these questions, and really our robust dialogue without all the answers, but with some consensus. Really, we're very similar to Rhonda and Sharon's comments, that much of what we already feel like we're doing, but it's not been formalized, is that sort of dual responsibility. including, as they kind of articulated too, having some input on hiring and performance management and things like that. So it's similar, but I wanted to give some context, I guess, of the why on the HR, that those strategies to get us to those important areas are why we're doing it, and that we're already starting the work to use that system-wide approach to delivering these services.
Thank you very much, Marcia, for that and your patience. Gerald and I think, want to call attention to a few things. Do you want to start, Gerald?
Just one last thing. As Terry mentioned, implementation of everything that we've decided to move forward with today is going to be key. And we've got a matrix that all of you should have a copy of. We're not going to have time to go through really any of these right now. We're under a time constraint. But these are all things that we pulled from Steve's interviews with all the folks that we discussed before on each of the campuses. And these are all initiatives or themes that we saw throughout his report. And we've developed some initiatives in order to move forward on those in order to create a more collaborative culture and environment within the system. I think these things are very important as far as implementation. That's where the rubber hits the road on all the things that we've been discussing today. So take a look at those. This is going to be a living and breathing document, for us to add to, take away from, whatever, as we move forward. Also, the unique characteristics of each university, this is also included in the packet of information that you had. Please take a look at those. We'll have some further discussion on those at some point, but I think these will be very useful to us in the future as we make decisions, as the campuses set strategic priorities, and as we continue to grow and understand what each campus does. So thank you guys for putting all the work and time into these documents. We'll discuss them at some later date and work on implementation of all the things that we talked about today.
Thank you, Daryl. My final comment is a thank you as well. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with these leaders and individuals from the University of Missouri system. And part of your agreement with the Association of Governing Boards is I'm only a phone call away. So if I can help in any way on the off chance, don't hesitate to be in touch. Thank you very much.
Let me... A few things to wrap up, and the first thing to do is, I think, Dr. McTaggart, we owe you a great debt of gratitude. You have been tremendous to work with. You have made yourselves available, so members will know sometimes you have to catch him on his sailboat, but he'll answer eventually. But Dr. McTaggart, we very much appreciate your work and services. We really do. Two other people we have got to say thank you to, who have put tremendous work into both this development session and into the what I think was a very successful product of the task force. One is our general counsel, Steve Owen. All I can say is, Steve, thank God we're not responsible for your hourly rate. Steve has done tremendous work, and we appreciate it. In addition, you all know who really runs the board, don't you? Cindy, stand up. Cindy has worked tirelessly. She really doesn't get nearly the credit she deserves because a lot of her best ideas I try to take credit for. But Cindy, you've just been fantastic, and we're grateful. Two more things to let you all know. In September meeting, we're going to focus on research. We've had some discussions. That'll be finalized, but there'll be reach out to you because research will be the focus of the September meeting. And finally, you all might notice that the student curator all of a sudden looks a little different. And so I want to introduce you to the new student curator who was just appointed by Governor Parson, Avery Welker. Avery, welcome. And finally, and I got to worry that I might tear up too, we've had a great student representative. And I know again how hard she's worked. I adore this gal. I know some other people want to say some things, but the service, Courtney, that you've given is fantastic. Anybody else want to say anything to Courtney? I think Alex?
Yeah, I'd certainly love to say something. As Chancellor of Mizzou, I could not be more proud of having someone from Mizzou serve on the board, and certainly have someone serve on the board the way that Courtney has. She showed incredible dedication during this time to being a board member, balancing all that she had to do, represented really what I would consider to be the best of Mizzou, someone who can do all of the things that we need them to do, and in terms of their education, in terms of outside of education, and that is something that we value. And she's shown this remarkable, really inspirational support of what it is that higher education does and what it can allow to happen. And you'll notice that during her time as the student curator, she didn't just think about Mizzou, but she thought about the entire UM system, all 4 campuses, and represented all 4 campuses and talked about what was happening at each campus and what were the important points. And we certainly valued all of that input. On a personal note, to me, she's just an amazing person, someone who is hardworking and has balanced all of those commitments to law school, to board activities, and to outside activities that I know are going on.
Let's hope so.
Yes. and I have to admit that lately she's actually demonstrated a remarkable drive towards her goals. I can say that she will not quit on anything. She probably knows what I'm talking about last night. But no matter how small or large that task might be. And she also has enlightened me on some of the finer things along the way, and to make me realize that apparently you just can't have enough French fries in your burrito. So, again, between us. But in all seriousness, thank you so much, Courtney, for your service to the board. Thank you for being such a great representative for Mizzou. We're privileged to have, certainly I'm privileged to have had the opportunity to learn from you. And I know that I missed your graduation. So what I'd like to do is officially welcome you to the Mizzou alumni and come over and also officially shake your hand and congratulate you for graduating. Thank you.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.